Hey folks, I'm Chris Thornton. Welcome to my new channel, and I'm going to help you succeed in coding. Welcome to my new channel where I'm going to be teaching you how to code. Some of you may already know that I'm a high school science teacher and may well have come here from my other channel where I teach high school science. You can see that if you click just up here in the corner. So you may be wondering why it is I've decided to do a channel about coding. Well, it actually stems from a lesson I was teaching in real life to one of my classes. This was a group of very able 15-year-olds, and I happened to mention in passing HTML. This is the language which web pages are written in. And they all sort of groaned. They clearly didn't like HTML, and I found that quite strange because, as I say, they're an able group, and HTML is pretty easy as far as I'm concerned. So I wondered why it was. I even showed them a little bit of my source code, and they all kind of responded in the same way. They looked at me as if to say, is it really that easy? I don't know why they hadn't quite got to grips with it, and I was confused, so just out of professional curiosity, I thought, I'll look up the specifications, I'll see exactly what it is that they're learning to try and figure out why it is they're having so much difficulty learning how to code. No. Why would you put that in there? Okay, I think we can see why some people might find it difficult getting into coding. I'm not saying there isn't a place for all those concepts in computer science. I am saying that if you're a beginner, and I'm assuming that you are, you probably don't want to know all that stuff. So I'm going to leave those higher level concepts completely out, and I'm going to get to grips with actually building some code. You're going to go from not knowing anything to having a basic but working drum machine. Let me just give you a little bit of background about me to give you some context first though. I've been coding for about 2 decades now. I started coding at university and I was working in C. And that's kind of important because an awful lot of other programming languages are descended from C. They have a lot of similar characteristics. So you know that Hollywood trope where someone is proven to be a super elite hacker because they learned whatever it was in a very short space of time?
The point is, I learned Ruby on Rails over a weekend when I was 17.
Yeah, just like that. Well, that is a lot easier if you've already worked on something similar. If you've already learned to code in one particular language, it's really easy to learn to code in another. Ask any 10 programmers which their best programming language for a beginner to start with would be, and you'll probably get 10 different answers. But the real truth of it is, it doesn't matter that much. Start with any programming language and you'll find that the skills are super transferable. It's like learning to speak British English and then trying to communicate with someone who speaks American English. There are tiny differences, but only fairly tiny ones. So the language I'm going to be starting out with is one called JavaScript. And I'm going to focus on this for a couple of key reasons. The first reason is that it's what we call an interpreted programming language. That is, the code which you write is then passed to another program, and that program just runs straight through it and gives you the output. The program which will be running it is a web browser. The whole thing will just run in a normal web browser. So you probably already have the software installed to run it, and it's quick. When you make changes, you can see what those changes are very rapidly. Whereas the alternative to an interpreted language would be a compiled language. C is an example of a compiled language. And then another program's got to package it all together in an executable, and then you run the executable and it just slows things down. So interpreted languages are fast, and you probably already have the software installed to let you run JavaScript. And the second reason is that JavaScript is pretty fault tolerant. So for example, if you miss a semicolon off the end of a line, some languages will freak out and you will get all sorts of weird errors. JavaScript doesn't really mind that. So if you make some tiny errors here and there as you're getting started, it's not going to be too picky about it. So it's a pretty good language to start with. I'm sure some people will disagree, But the point is that those skills which you learn as you're doing this are going to be transferable. Now, I'm going to be assuming that you are completely new to coding, that you've done no coding at all and you have no idea how to do it. So this lesson is going to be a relatively long one as I introduce some core concepts. I introduce 3 key languages. That's going to be HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. And we get you set up with an environment in which you can do your coding and developing the app which we're going to be building. All the same, in about 30-35 minutes, you're going to not just have learned a few really important concepts about coding and the basics of those 3 languages, but you'll also have built a working drum machine. It'll look something like this. Now, I accept that that is kind of basic at the moment, but by the end of the next lesson, we'll make it look significantly cooler and give it a bit more functionality. And by the end of the lesson after that, we're going to turn it into a properly fully featured sequencer. All of this is not going to take very long at all, and you are going to go from not really knowing very much at all at the moment to knowing lots. So, enough introduction, I've talked for long enough, let's get right down to things. And the first thing we're going to need is somewhere for you to write your code. You could write this in any text editor really, even something as simple as Notepad in Windows, and I have actually used that to code before, but you're better off going with something which is a bit more fully featured. So I recommend this. This is Atom. You go to atom.io to download it, and that applies a lot more formatting to the text to help you understand whether you've made syntax errors. It also does some predictive typing for you, which will reduce the chances of you making errors. And the reason I picked this particular one, out of all the many text editors that there are out there, is it's free and it's available on pretty much any platform. You're also going to need to download some files. I've linked these down in the description. These are some files which you'll need to install somewhere on your computer. I've just put mine in Documents. So I've created a folder, Succeeding Coding, and for lesson 1, I've just put it there. You should have, when you unpack the zip file, a directory called sounds with a load of individual sounds all in there. Those are just WAV files. And then you should also have this file, drummachine01.html. That is an HTML document which we're going to use as the basis for our web page, which is going to contain the drum machine. Once all that's downloaded and installed, what you need to do is open Drum Machine in a web browser just by dragging and dropping it there. Once it's in there, you should see up at the top here in the window where you normally type your URL, you should see that this is referring to something on your hard drive and it's drummachine01.html. There's nothing else on this page at the moment because we haven't added anything, but this is a basic web page. You will also need to do the exact same in Atom once it's installed. Once it's installed, you should get a page which looks like this. I recommend you click yes, I want to help improve Atom for that bit, and then let's close all of these bits. If you really want, you can have another look at them at another point, but let's drop our file that we're going to be editing into here. I'm going to do one more thing, which is I'm going to change the size of these windows. So that's going to take up half of my screen and that's going to take up the other half of my screen. So I'll be able to type my code here and then flip to this other window, refresh the page and see the effect that the changes have. So we've now got a setup where we can quickly do some work and then very rapidly see what the effect of that change has been. And this is the sort of setup you really want when you're doing any coding. It makes things a lot faster and it makes it easy if you make an error to go back and change it. This file which I've got you to put on your machine, drummachine01.html. This is our first bit of HTML code. We start with this bit with the triangular brackets and the exclamation point there, and it says doc type HTML. That just tells your browser it's an HTML5 document. You could probably leave that out. A lot of browsers will process the page just fine without it, but we're going to stick that in there for the time being. Then you'll notice that we've got all of these bits which Atom on the default setting, it shows them up in red. Again, they're in these triangular brackets, and HTML uses these triangular brackets a lot, and these things, like this bit that says HTML there, that is known as a tag. A tag is an element of an HTML document. HTML is short for Hypertext Markup Language. Hypertext is just text with links that let you click to another page, and a markup language is a language where you do all the word processing stuff which you normally would with a word processor, but you tell it start being bold here, stop being bold there. So let me just show you what I mean. In this section where it says body, I've hit enter, and a couple of things to notice before I type anything else. Just up here at the top of the tab, I've now got a little blue circle. That shows me that I have yet to save this particular document. It hasn't been saved, my changes haven't been saved. So when it shows that, I recommend getting in the habit of saving frequently. The shortcut key for saving, by the way, is Control S if you don't already know it, or if you're on a Mac, that should be Function S, I think. I'm not that familiar with Macs. But if you hit Control S, there we go, that little blue dot goes away. So let's type something here in the body. Here is some text. This bit is bold, and this isn't bold. And save that. And if I hit refresh just here, which is, by the way, Control R is your shortcut for refreshing the page in most browsers, or Function R, I guess, if you're on a Mac. There you go, our text has now shown up there. By the way, you can also, on any web page, if you're wanting to see what the HTML is, if you right click on there, you should be able to go to View Page Source, and it'll show the whole page source. So there you'll see that exactly matches everything that we've got here. So if I want to make this bit bold, in a normal word processor, what I'd do is I'd select that bit, and then up at the top of the screen I'd click a little button that says bold. The way it works in a markup language like HTML is at the start of the bit you want to be bold, you put a tag. All the tags in HTML are in these triangular brackets. So that tag B there is for bold. I hit Control S to save again, Alt Tab to flip windows, and Control R to refresh the page. And there you go, we've got all of that bit in bold. Now notice that this second bit is also bold, and I don't want that to be bold, but the trouble is I haven't told it where to stop being bold. So just here I need to put a second tag. Most of your tags in HTML come in pairs, and the pairs almost always match. The only difference is the one at the start will just be the tag as it is, the one at the end will be that tag with a / as well. So that /B says stop being bold here. Whatever was bold before, this is the end of it. So if we refresh the page, we've now got a bit that's bold and other bits which aren't bold, and we've told it where to start and where to stop. If you get that, you understand a markup language. That's pretty much all that there is to HTML. So it's pretty easy to add stuff to this web page. There's a couple of other things which I should mention at this point. Firstly, this should really be within another element. This should be within a tag like the P tag. So I could put this within another one like this. And notice again that I've got those tags at the start and the end of it. P is just short for paragraph. There's another thing which is worth mentioning, which is that really B for bold text has been deprecated in HTML5. It's no longer really the standard way to use that. There's a different tag which we use, which is strong, because that implies that there's broader formatting options than there just is with it being bold or not. Saying that the formatting is strong, there's more things that you can do, and we'll get into how we format text at a later point. But the short version is we don't really use B anymore. Most browsers will still work with it, but we can change that. And the easy way to change that, I am going to find all of those bits. Now I could just change the letter B, but that would also change the B here in these body tags, which would stop them working properly. It would change the B there, and it would change that B there as well. I don't want to do that. What I want to do is just change these tags. So I need to come up with a way to just select those tags. And I can't type the whole tag in like that because they are actually different. What I can do is type these final two characters of the tag in, that B and then that triangular bracket. If I do that, and I hit Control F there for find, if you forget that, then you'll see that up here for all of these different sorts of shortcut keys, it does tell you what they are, but Control F is the one that I hit. I'm going to type B and then that closing part of the tag and hit Find All, and you'll see it's found those two tags. And then down here I can replace it. The correct tag that I should be using now is strong. So if I go to replace all, then you can see there, replaced my two B tags with the correct tags now, strong. Doesn't really make any difference here, but it's now compliant with the modern version of HTML. However, I don't want a page which says here's some text. That's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is making a drum machine. So the first thing I'm going to do is a heading. So I'm going to type H1 and then drum machine. There we go. So that's given me a heading. There are other H's as well, H2, H3, H4, H5. I can't remember whether there's an H6 or not, possibly. The H's just give you a particular type of heading. Next, what I want to do is create a button. So I'm going to use an element called a div to create this button. And I'm going to create a kick drum first. So I'm going to label that div kick. There we go, and close the tag and refresh this. So there you go, we've got a very, very basic web page now. Other things to notice about this web page before we get into any more detail. Firstly, these tags are nested. So the body tags here contain these H1 tags and the div tags. The head tag here contains the title tag. The title is just what appears at the top of the tab there. And these tags are all nested within these HTML tags. And to show this nesting, you see that they're indented. Atom will actually do some of that indentation for you automatically. Different programmers get really uptight about the way you indent things. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just bear in mind that there are indentations there which help show you when one tag is contained within another tag. So, this is a pretty basic layout at the moment, but we're getting there. We've made some progress, we've said what our page is, and we've got our button, but we can't actually see the button yet. It doesn't look like a button really, there's nothing going on there. So we need to add a little bit more. What we're going to do is use some CSS to style this. So I'm going to add a tag here in the head, so that'll load as soon as the page loads. Most of this is information which isn't seen when the page loads, except for really this title there. But the head does contain all sorts of useful metadata, data about the page. This is where we're going to put our formatting for now. Now at a later point we're going to move that onto another file so that we've got our formatting separate from our content, but for the time being we're going to stick it all in the head so that it's all in one place. So to apply style we're going to use something called CSS. I'm going to start typing and you can see that Atom here is already suggesting what the tag's going to be. So I start out with a tag with the name style, and again I'm going to close that. In fact, I like to close my tags quite often when I open them and then work in between them, because that reduces the chances of me forgetting to close a tag at a later point. I also need to specify what type of style this is. There is more than one way to apply style to a web page. What we're going to do is tell it that the type, and it is just text/CSS. That is the one you're going to use far more commonly than anything else. In fact, I can't actually think of a time when I've ever used anything other than text/CSS. Most of your formatting is going to be in that format. Between these two tabs is where our formatting information goes. Now that isn't in HTML. That's in a different language called CSS. That's short for Cascading Style Sheets. The idea is that you can apply one style to one lot of things and then a slightly different style to another lot of things, and so on. Again, don't worry about that for the time being. Just be aware that the syntax is a little bit different here. So between these style tags, and only between these style tags, I'm going to be using a slightly different syntax to our HTML syntax. The first thing that you've got to do is name the type of element which you want to apply the style to. So div is the type of element that I want to apply it to, and I want to put all my text information about the style in there in between these curly braces. Again, you can see the atom as I typed one curly brace, it automatically added the next one. And if I return down there onto the next line, you can see that it's indented things as well. So the first thing that I'm going to do is change the background color of this div, and I'm going to color it green. Notice two things. Firstly, background color has got a colon straight after it, and then the property has got a semicolon after that, and that is really important, that semicolon. You can get away with not putting it in a few limited cases, but I wouldn't even worry about that. I'd just put a semicolon after every property which you describe in your bit of CSS here. So always get into the habit of naming what the property is and then giving the property itself and then putting a semicolon. That's going to be super important. So background color is green. I've saved that. Let's refresh the page and you can see that my div now is colored green. And we can also see, now we've actually changed the color of it, that it stretches right across the page, which we don't want. That isn't much of a button. So I'm going to type a little bit more in here to give us a bit more formatting to make it look a bit more like a button. And through the magic of editing, I'm going to jump straight to that point now. Okay, so I've now got a whole load more properties. Some of these, width, height, I'm sure you can figure that out. Margin is spacing around the element, and padding is spacing within that element. The border radius is going to give us a curved border on this rectangle. And then text align, we'll put the text in the center of it, and we're going to be using whatever the default sans serif font is on the machine. You can specify all sorts of different fonts by name in there, but remember that some machines might not have that particular font installed. So let's refresh the page, and you can see we've now got something which looks a lot more like a button. Now that brings in another issue here, because if I were to create any other div on here, let's say this is not a button. So there is a div which I definitely don't want to be a button at all, but if I hit refresh, you see that it's got exactly the same styling as the button. And we might want to put other divs on here. They're a really useful element. You'll probably use lots and lots of different ones on any web page which you create. So what I need to do is add a bit more code in here. I need to add another property to this particular div that's going to be the button. So I'm going to specify that it's got a class, and that class I'm just going to call button. Now a class just means that any div which I say is part of this class is going to have the styling applied to it by this particular bit of CSS. So by saying div.button, that means any div with the class button will have this styling applied, whereas any other div which doesn't have the class of button won't have this styling applied. It's probably clearer if I just refresh the page to show you what I mean. There we go. So by specifying that that one is the button, and then this will work for any other buttons which I create, by specifying that one is the button, that means that my styling is just applied to buttons, and I don't have to worry about that styling being applied to anything else. So let me just get rid of that, because we don't need that right now. There are a couple of other things which I can do here as well. I'd quite like it if when I click this button, there was some sign that I was clicking the button, but at the moment there is no sign of that. So underneath this I can say div.button again, because I'm just wanting to apply this to the button, and then I can use, if I use a colon there, I can select active there, and this will just apply this particular styling to the button when it's active, that is when it's being clicked. So all I'm going to do is give it a new background color. Instead of green, and it's a fairly dark green color there, I'm going to go with cyan, which is a lighter color, and that will mean that when I click this, let me just refresh the page, when I click it, there you go, it lights up. Let's also add a little bit of styling to that h1 tag. So again, I'll just type the name of the tag here, and then I'm going to type, let's see, font, let's do font size, 400%. We'll make it 4 times bigger than it is just there by default. Font, let's do font style, italic. And you can see a fair amount of this I'm not having to actually type out in full. Atom's doing it for me. And text align. Let's align it to the center of the page as well. So there we go. We're already starting to get to the point where things are looking more like a drum machine, except we haven't actually got a drum machine which does anything yet other than the button lights up. So that's the next thing to do. And this is where we're really going to have to do some proper programming. We've done some coding already. We've written some stuff in code, but now we actually need to get some interactive features here. First up, let's load the files, the sample files which we're going to use. Because what we want to do is play the files from that folder named sounds when we click these buttons. So the way you do that is with a tag called audio. And we're going to need to specify where that audio file is. So audio source equals, and you'll find that there is a very similar syntax when you do web pages, similar syntax for specifying where images are as well. But that src is just short for source. So long as you've put everything in the same directory as I have, you don't need to specify the whole directory tree. You don't need to, for example, on a Windows machine, type, well, you can see where mine is. It's c:/users/users/documents/succeeding coding. You don't need to worry about all of that. So long as you've got the directory named sounds in the same directory as your web page, you can just start out from that directory. So sounds / let me just check the name of the file. Oh yeah, 808 kick.wav. Okay, so that is now telling my page here that there is an audio file that it's going to need to load as the page loads. It's not doing anything with that audio file yet, so that's the next thing which we need to specify. Because it could be as soon as the page loads, it's going to load and play that file. We don't want that to happen. We only want it to happen when we press the button. So I'm going to type auto start equals false. And then even though I'm not putting anything between those tags, I do need to close this tag. So that file will now be loaded, and it's not going to play when the page is loaded. So we shouldn't really see any difference, or hear any difference for that matter. Now at the moment, pressing that button doesn't load the file. It doesn't play the file. So that's the next thing which we need to do. We need to make sure that there's a way for this page to be able to find the correct file when we press that button. So what we need to do next is give it an ID. And you can give an ID to pretty much any element in a page. But in this case, I just want it so that when my bit of code is looking for this file, it's able to find the right one. So I'm just going to call this 808 kick and save that. So now when my bit of code is looking for the name of this file, it's just going to look for the thing called 808 kick, and it's going to load this particular audio file. Finally, we actually get into the JavaScript, and this also goes between some different tags, a bit like we did with our CSS up at the top of the page. So it goes between a pair of tags. I thought that was going to autocomplete for me there. It goes between a pair of script tags. You can specify what type of script it is. It'll assume by default that it's JavaScript. Now this is where we actually get into some programming theory. Programs are just collections of things which you want a computer to do. We call them functions. So a function is a process that does a thing. And we can write our own functions, which are collections of other functions, so we can call them at a particular time. This function is a nice simple one. It just contains 2 other built-in functions. And the syntax for any function is just like this. You type function for a start, and that declares that you are about to describe what one function is and what it should do. We then need to give it a name. This name can be anything, but stick with something which makes sense. We want it to play samples, so I'm just going to call this function playSample. You will always have a pair of these parentheses straight after the name of the function as well in JavaScript. And that's true for an awful lot of other programming languages. They use very, very similar syntax. So I've said that here's a function, and I've also said it's called playSample, and I've got those parentheses in there. And then everything else for the function, you can in some cases type it all on one line, although that does in some cases defeat the object of having a separate function anyway if you can fit it all on one line. But usually what you're going to do is put things in between some of these braces, exactly like with the CSS. So all the stuff which you want your function to do goes in between those braces. And again, similar to CSS, it's a good idea to finish every line with a semicolon. Strictly speaking, you don't actually have to do that with JavaScript, but it would be a good idea. Also, strictly speaking, you don't have to have the indentations, but it's again going to make it way easier to follow. Plus, other programming languages demand indentations or demand that you have semicolons at the end of it. So C, for example, if you don't finish your lines with a semicolon, it will not work. Python, if you don't have the correct spacing, it will not work. So getting into those good habits now is a good idea, but it's fairly fault tolerant if you drop a space or if you drop a semicolon here and there, which is why I wanted to start with JavaScript. So the first thing we need to do is tell our JavaScript where to find the sample which we want to play. So what we need to do is declare that there is a variable here, and I'm just going to call that sample. This is the sample which we want to play. And we tell it that we've already said somewhere in this document it's there. The way we do that is documents, dots, and then we use a built-in function. This is a function which is built into JavaScript. It's getElementById. Now just here, it's tried to guess what the ID of this element is. It's got it wrong. We haven't called anything ID. What we're looking for is this one, 808 kick. So that's exactly what I'm going to type in there. So now this knows that it's looking for something called 808 kick. And it's going to give that the name sample. That is just going to be within our little bit of JavaScript which we're writing. When we say sample, it's going to be specifically dealing with 808 kick. Then all we need to do is use another built-in function, the play function. And we call that on our object sample, just like this. And again, a semicolon at the end. That's all there is to it. That is the first proper bit of programming that we've done. There's just one more thing which we need to do, because at the moment we've got the function to play the sample. It can find the sample that we want, but we don't know that when we click this button, it's supposed to call that function to play that sample. So we've got the final steps of this, but we need our first step. So that is the last thing which we need to do. So we're going to use a property called onClick. There it is. And this is going to tell us what to do when we click this particular div. And what we want it to do is call the function play sample. There you see, it's already figured out. That's the name of our function. Make sure that you include those parentheses in there as well. So now, when we click this div, as well as changing color, it should call this particular function, and it looks for this function. Incidentally, you could put this script anywhere you want on the page, pretty much, but I've just left it at the bottom of the body just to keep it all together. So it's going to look for this function, play sample. That is going to then look for our element called 808 kick, and it's then going to play that element. So if I hit refresh over here, there we go. It's played the sample, which is exactly what we were wanting. And again, if I click it again, it plays it again. So we've got a drum machine now that plays one drum. And that's neat. And I could add a load more audio sources in here, and I will do that shortly. And I could add a load more buttons in here, and I'll do that shortly too. But what I'd really rather not have to do is create a new function for every single button. I'd like to use the same function for every single button because we just want them all to do the same thing. And that's what programming lets you do. Rather than doing something really repetitive over and over and over again, what programming lets you do is do the same thing to loads of different options. In this case, what we're going to use is our same function playSample for all of the different samples. We're just going to keep calling the same function. So we're going to need to make a tiny change to it. First of all, what we're going to need to do is tell it which sample we want it to play. And the way we do that is by passing some information to it. Just up here where we call a function, I'm going to give it the name of the audio file we want it to play, or at least the name of the ID. So just there, I'm going to say 808_kick. Now that alone isn't enough. What that does is it passes this particular string of information, so literally that string of characters, it passes that to the function. At the moment the function isn't set up to take that, so what I'm going to do here is say that the thing we pass to it will be the name of the sample we want it to play. And then, just here, instead of that being specific, what I'm going to do is put sample name in there. And now this is general. So, I call a function here when I click the button. And that passes this particular string, 808kick, to it, which I know is exactly the same as my ID up here. The function then takes that, it looks for the particular element with the name that I've passed to it, and then it plays that element. So it's functionally doing the same thing, but now I've separated this out a little bit so that I just need to say, play the 808kick, and it should, when I hit refresh, work exactly the same. So let's add the rest of my audio files in there and let's create some new buttons. I'm going to skip ahead here in the video because it just looks exactly the same. It's going to be a case of copying and pasting and changing the names for the different drum samples which I want to play. Okay, so there's all my buttons created and they're all linked to the audio files, which are also all loaded now. So when I hit refresh, we should get a whole load of buttons, which should play different audio files. Always a good idea as you're going just to check that you haven't broken anything and that things do work. And this is the thing which people don't always appreciate about programming. Very few people sit down and write the entire program all in one go. Generally what people do is they write a bit, they check it works, and then they add a bit more functionality and check that works, and a bit more and check that works, and so on. It's not that people conceive of this whole thing in their heads. It's very much an incremental process, which ends up, well, you can see now we've got, in our very simple page, we've got down to just over 60 lines worth of code now. We're still not quite done. We're getting there, but there's a couple more things which we need to do just before we finish this lesson. First of all, I don't like the spacing of all these buttons which are going down the page like this. That's kind of a pain if you want to click that button and then you want to click the kick. That's inconvenient. So what I want to do is space these across the page. So what I'm going to do is put all of those divs, which are just here, remember, I'm going to put them in a container. I'm going to call this, I'm going to create a class here, and we'll call it button container. Okay, so we've got a new class there, and down the bottom here, let's just close that div as well. Just a minute, indent that properly too. Now that makes things a little bit unclear because we've got all of these divs within this other div. So what I'm going to do is indent all of this. You can indent several lines at a time. All you need to do, and I'm not sure exactly what this will be on a Mac, I assume this will be something like function and the right square brackets, or if there's a control button. I can't remember whether there's a control button on a Mac keyboard or not. But it's whatever the Mac equivalent is of control and then the square bracket, the right hand one. So In fact, let me just type that bracket so you can see what I'm talking about. It's that bracket that you're going to do. So you'll type control and then that bracket. And that should indent all of that just by one space. So now we can see again that all of these divs are nested within that. You wouldn't, strictly speaking, need to do that, but it does make your code a lot clearer. And that means that you can come back a day later, a week later, a year later, and still understand what's going on. It's good practice to do that, basically. Okay, so those should now all be in that container div. It hasn't really made any difference to it, but that's because we haven't styled this div. So let's style it. I'm saying the word div an awful lot. It's starting to lose any meaning. But we would type style div dot button container. Okay, and if we wanted to, for example, change the background color, let's make it red so that we can see what we're dealing with. So you can see that all of those divs are now contained within this other large red div. What I want to do is have them all laid out horizontally rather than vertically. So in here, for this other div, what I'm going to do is specify their layout. And the way you do that is display. And you can see there are lots of options here. I'm going to go for inline grid. There we go. So they are all displayed in line. They're all over to the left though, if we go full screen with that, and I don't want that. So what I do want to do is text align and center. So this is in the container. This is just going to make things aligned towards the center within that container. There you go. You can see it's moved them all towards the center now. So when we're full screen, there they all are. They're aligned towards the center. The only reason it's wrapped around to another row here is just because I've run out of space going horizontally. I'm going to get rid of that background color. I don't want that anymore. And hit refresh. And when I go full screen, I've now got my basic drum machine playing my 808 samples, and we're done. So there you go, just under 70 lines of code, and you've now got your very first program. I hope that was helpful to you. I hope you could follow through everything that I was saying. I was throwing quite a lot of new concepts at you there. It wouldn't have actually taken us quite as long as it has done to type the whole thing there, but I did want to make sure you understood what you were doing and why you were doing it, rather than just copying off me. Have a play with it now, change some of these properties. The best way to learn programming is by fiddling around with things and seeing what happens. I recommend at this point that you go to File and Save As, and then you leave that finished copy and create a new one. Call it Drum Machine 02 and make this the one which you play around on. For my next video, what we're going to do is add more functionality to this to make it easier to play, particularly if you don't have a touch screen to play it on. And we're going to make it look a lot better as well. But I hope that's been a useful video for you. If you did find that useful, then do please, just above where my face is right now, there should be a circle to click that you can click to subscribe. And also click these two links here to check out my other two channels. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.